I'm someone who is incredibly bad at posing. A character just standing there is my bread and butter, maybe even a little hand on the hip if I'm feeling really bold. Honestly, I really envy all the artists who can draw such fluid and lively poses, which is something I've struggled to capture in my own art. So when I've got comments asking me for a video on posing, I was understandably at quite a loss with what to do. I mean, trying to teach people about something I struggle with myself didn't seem like it would be useful. But after some more thought into my art journey and how I've slowly gained confidence over time, I figured I'd be able to give my 2 cents on posing, specifically the steps I took to improving my poses and the resources and exercises I found helpful. So no, this video won't be super technical, but I'll try my best to provide resources that are, and some exercises you could do to improve your posing and gain more confidence with anatomy. So with that preface, let's get into the resources and the building blocks of posing. If you watch any video on posing or anatomy, 99% of the time, life studies will be mentioned. I've seen many artists dislike studies and see them as pointless or feel like they don't learn anything from them, but it's true when artists say that you need to study real life in order to improve. I feel like studies where I take a photo and break down the muscles are studies in which I feel like I'm actually, studying. Opening my textbook, thinking super hard, and actively absorbing more anatomy knowledge. These studies on screen right now are what I think of as passive studying, at least for me. Since I usually end up doing these more as mindless warm-ups, I think of it like practice questions to a test. The more poses I draw, even if I'm not actively thinking about each muscle, the more I'm building my visual library and preparing myself to draw similar things when I create my own poses. Let me put it this way, if you were to draw a horse right now, most of you wouldn't be able to draw something very accurate to life, even though you've probably seen horses thousands of times. But if you drew 1,000 horses, you'd probably be able to draw something more accurate to what they actually look like just from your imagination. Poses in the human form work the same way, where it will be incredibly hard to draw complex poses out of imagination if you have no visual library to pull from. By doing tons of studies, you'll be able to remember what the leg looks like when bent or the shape of the torso when sitting. Of course, proper muscle knowledge is also needed, but that's also what studies are for. Being able to draw something and recognize why it looks like that because of the way muscles work underneath. Regardless, doing countless studies has really helped when it came to better visualizing the body and figuring out how to construct it using basic building blocks, which I discussed in my anatomy video. But not only that, it also helps with warming up. One of the reasons I feel like my poses are stiff is because I haven't warmed up yet. After all, you need to stretch before you work out. Doing these pen studies really builds my confidence and makes my lines feel much smoother and fluid, which then translates to my poses when I actually start drawing. So all in all, studies are the way to go. I'm sure most of you knew that already, but I figured I'd explain why it's so helpful even if you feel like you're just doing it mindlessly. Even then, they can still contribute to your artistic growth and visual library. But before I get into more specific tips, I wanted to share some resources I've used to learn the more technical side of posing and anatomy resources, if you want to do some studies. One of my favorite art books is Force, Dynamic Life Drawing by Michael D. Mattesi. There's a lot of great stuff in this book about how to make your poses feel lively and dynamic, and I've carried a lot of these principles into my own poses when trying to improve them. I also really like Emilio de Cure's stuff. I believe he's coming out with his own pose book full of his amazing work. I really like studying from him because he breaks the body down in such an easy and pleasing way that I've tried to learn from, and he draws a lot of fun action poses I've loved trying to emulate. He definitely has an amazing idea of flow, so he's definitely worth checking out. As for posing, I often use Pinterest or Line of Action to find poses to draw. If you specifically want to learn dynamic poses, however, finding photos of athletes is the way to go. Usually these photos are in the middle of an action, so you can really see some of the muscles in motion. When you see some of these photos, you can really sense how fast the person is running or how hard they're hitting a ball, so I love studying these to see what makes them feel this way and how to emphasize that action and put it into my own work. And last but not least, yourself. One thing my professor told me that I still do to this day is to do whatever pose you're trying to draw. Not only can you take a picture of yourself as a reference to help, but when you actively do the pose, you're able to gauge what muscles are being used and where your weight is being shifted. So, for example, if you're trying to draw a character swinging a sword, try acting it out yourself and see what leg may be taking most of the weight or which arm is exerting the most force. The book I mentioned earlier talks about concepts like center of gravity, implied force, and how to implement these into your art, so using these both in conjunction can really help your understanding of posing and make your characters feel like they have weight behind their actions. Feel free to leave any other artists or resources you enjoy in the comments, but hopefully that helps anyone wondering where to even find posing resources. But with that, let's get into the tips. A lot of the time, I feel like my posing is stiff because I don't go into it with any clear intention. Maybe it's the concept artist in me talking, but I always want my poses to tell something about the character. Usually I don't draw crazy action scenes or super extreme poses, so the small details are everything when it comes to posing for me. Is the character shy and reserved? Are they confident? Are they happy-go-lucky? All these things influence how I approach a pose. An obvious example could be shy characters slouching or taking up less space, while more confident or extroverted characters may take up more space and talk with their hands more, be more expressive in their body language. A character's posture and way of holding themselves according to their personality are all things I try to think of before even starting a piece, so I can go into the pose with intention for how I want it to feel. This is usually where the more technical knowledge of things like line of action or contrapposto come in, using my knowledge of those types of things to execute my vision for a pose. Perhaps exaggerating the tilt of a character's hips and shoulders to give them a more sassy look, or puffing a character's chest out to show their confidence, using the line of action to exaggerate that. Even in small ways, I try to implement these small changes to posing, like when I drew my characters drawing themselves. You can see Stanley is more reserved, holding the paper close to his chest with stiff shoulders, whereas my other character, Chet, is showing it off with confidence. Even giving my characters different ways of holding the paper set them apart and showed a bit of their personality without even needing to make each pose incredibly dynamic and exaggerated. People have different ways of doing things in real life, so that can also translate to your characters in just everyday actions. Of course, I still have a ways to go, but just trying to think of what I want to convey in each pose before I draw has really helped me differentiate my poses and figure out how to apply all the concepts I've learned into my art in a way that works for me. But of course, even with intention, your poses can still be stiff, which is where my next tip comes in. I'm willing to bet a majority of artists struggle with perfectionism. Honestly, sometimes I feel like I have it the worst. Since I'm normally such a structured person, it blends into my art even more, making me constantly redo a single line for hours just to get it right. But over time, I've had to learn that good poses don't come from refining a stiff one, but just making 1,000 awful sketches until you strike gold. One must think of this image in times like these. I mean, it's only natural, since stiffness when drawing would definitely translate to stiffness in posing. That's not only why you do warm-ups, but why you draw a pose multiple times. Usually I end up drawing things in twos. The first time I just draw the pose normally, using whatever reference I have and just trying to get it down. It'll probably be incredibly stiff and ugly, but don't worry about redoing it, you just need to finish it and make it exist. Then after I finish, I look and see where I can push the pose. Can I make the hips tilt more? Can I make the body lean another way? I try to make a mental note of things I want to change and what I can exaggerate, and then draw it again. After you've drawn it once, the next time is a lot easier, and you can focus less on all the small anatomical details and proportions and more on making the pose fun and pushing it to be better. Usually the second time around I feel a lot more loose and the pose is way more fun than the first time. And if it still looks bad, just do those steps again until you're satisfied. It's only natural that when we draw, we become too precious with our art and want to endlessly tweak small things about it, believing in the sunk cost fallacy that we need to stick to one sketch or all that time would be for naught. Part of the challenge I faced when improving my posing was getting over that mentality and just completely redrawing something when I didn't like it. Usually the next attempt ended up taking half as long, but looked 10 times better than what I did before. But with that, let's get into the last tip. Honestly, this tip is why I wanted to make this video in the first place. I feel like doing this is what made me a lot more confident in not only posing, but anatomy and art as a whole. To my knowledge, I haven't seen anyone talk about this, so really this video is just to share this final tip, which is just drawing your characters doing things. It sounds obvious, but hear me out so I can explain this further. When I first started drawing, a lot of my pieces were essentially just characters standing there. Of course, I do the occasional fancy piece with some metaphorical meaning behind it, but at the end of the day, a lot of it was just a character standing there, just with roses behind them. For me, my art started to change when I began drawing my characters exhibiting more of their personality. Usually I think of the Stanley sketch page where I show parts of his personality through some silly actions, like him using kids' utensils because he's scared of sharp objects. People really seem to like that, so eventually I continued drawing things like this, extending into different character interactions. I've heard many artists say that drawing characters interacting is one of the hardest things to do, and I can certainly agree with that. But continuing to draw challenging things over and over again will make it less and less difficult every time, and the things I used to think were scary, like drawing full-body character scenes, became a lot less intimidating the longer I worked at it. My favorite pieces I've done aren't the most technical ones, but my character-focused pieces where I'm able to showcase their dynamics or character traits through the posing and interactions. I'm sure a lot of you are motivated to draw through wanting to draw your OCs or favorite characters, and can come up with fun interactions with other characters or ways to highlight their personality. So really, my number one tip is to just go for it. I feel like in the past I was scared of trying anything ambitious because I lacked the knowledge to do so, but pushing yourself is really the best way to see substantial growth. If you keep attempting poses you see as difficult, everything else will become easier in comparison, and soon that difficult pose will become as easy as drawing a character standing. Honestly, in some ways it can be easier, since whenever I draw my more character-focused pieces, I'm able to figure out how to pose them easier. If I'm drawing a character carrying something, I know exactly what to do with their hands, and drawing them in the middle of an action makes it easier for me to conceptualize how I want it to look. Honestly, nowadays I struggle drawing reference sheets because I want to make it interesting, but I also need to show the character, so just drawing them standing there is kinda hard. This also helped me draw different angles much easier though, since I would usually stick to front or 3/4 facing views, but a lot of scenarios I wanted to depict needed a character looking from the side or at an odd angle, so I became a lot more comfortable drawing those. It's something I used to struggle with in the past, but now I find it incredibly easy due to the frequency in which I've drawn those different angles. And now if I'm drawing something new, then I know how to approach it because I figured out those other angles. Of course, I still want to practice playing more with perspective and foreshortening in my poses, but that just means I'm going to have to implement them a lot more frequently in my later drawings. Like I mentioned earlier with studying, the more you draw something, the more it gets added into your visual library. But even before I started doing character interactions, what I used to draw was simple character memes. What I used to do a lot was find funny audio clips on TikTok or YouTube and draw mine and my friends' characters to them, which also helped my posing a lot. Not only that, but it helped with my expressions, since I feel like in a lot of these audios you can vividly picture what expression they may be making just by listening to their voice. Honestly, audios can help a lot with visualizing certain scenes in your head, which also manifests in other things like animation memes or animatics. But the reason I recommend both this and small character comics or sketch pages is that they not only help you, but they're just fun to do. I also found that when I would dedicate individual pieces to trying out a crazy pose, I lost motivation because the purpose was just to study. That's why I've been drawn to these methods of practice, because I get a lot of inspiration from my OCs and love making funny drawings with them. And a lot of times I feel less pressure with silly character memes, so I don't become as stiff when drawing and just let myself be loose with it. Part of the reason I became loose is because I was just doodling on whiteboard with my friends all the time. And if that isn't enough motivation for you, I noticed my OC posts started doing a lot better, and I started building an audience when I started showing off my characters' personalities more. Of course, people are drawn to pretty paintings, but fleshing your characters out is what will really make them stick in people's minds. So with that, that's my tips. I still consider myself fairly mediocre at posing, but I figured that this video would still be helpful by sharing the ways I've gotten better over time. Honestly, the hardest part in my journey was gaining that confidence, which is why I wanted to share that last tip. Since by drawing difficult poses, I really did start feeling way better with my art and don't feel as limited in my abilities as I used to. Really, the more confidence you have, the more unique and expressive poses you'll be able to do. And even aside from that, I just wanted to give people an idea of how to practice their posing in a way that I consider lots of fun. I feel like a lot of tip videos give artists a bunch of knowledge, but not always engaging ways to hone and practice their skills. And since I know a lot of people can get bored of studies, tying practice into your interests can really make you motivated to improve. So not only will you be practicing, but if you do little character sketch pages or comics, then you'll also be sharing them to others in a very engaging way and building upon their personality. So definitely worth it in my opinion. If you've gotten to the end, thank you so much for watching. I always enjoy making these videos, and I wanted to get one out before Power Wash Simulator 2 hopefully shadow drops next week. Trust me, if that game comes out, you guys will not be hearing from me for the next month. I also just wanted to say thank you for 20,000 subscribers. That's honestly insane to me. My channel's been growing like way more than I anticipated, but it makes me really excited to continue posting, and I'm gonna keep diversifying my content since there's only so many things I can make tutorials of, so I might do some art process videos, stuff like that. I'm gonna be talking about some of my experience in the concept art industry since I just started getting into it, so expect that soon. But yeah, I'm really excited. Thank you guys so much for all the kind words you always put in the comments. It's very nice. I appreciate it so much. You don't know how much it means to me. So thank you so much, and bye.